central deep levels of the Indian administrative service, Madhavan brings a wealth of experience and insight to his writings, making him a luminary in the literary world and a true treasure of our times. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Priya, and congratulations to Chandana for her debut collection of poems. Only a word can lay that. Yes. And as I mentioned earlier, among all the literary genres, poetry receives probably the least attention from the reading public. But what it does is different from other genres, that it suddenly brings up an image, an unprompted thought, a sudden revelation, or an epiphany. So all these qualities I found in this collection of poems by Chandana. And well, I don't want to analyze it, but broadly it struck me that she deals in three different areas. Three strands are weaving her poetic craft. One is, of course, mythology, legends. And second is the present, the world we live in, the contemporary society. And third is an overwhelming concern for nature. So all these three are not separate compartments, but each seeping into the other, smudging the boundaries and finding their fruition in her words. The first poem, Khandava Prastha, kind of is emblematic of all these three things I said about the present, the mythology, and a concern for the nature. Khandava Prastha, or the burning down of the Khandava forest, is an important event narrated in the Mahabharata, and Chandana takes off from there. It is burning down of a great forest with all its animals, save a few birds. All its animals were burned down to build a city. What better or bitter metaphor can there be for our modern times, where forests and nature are being mauled in the name of development and progress? So it is a kind of sad poem, in the sense that it starts off with a brilliant description of the nature, the trees, how they survive, how they have survived, and how they are giving shades to people. And suddenly, the greed of the princess, the Pandava princess, or the princess of the Kuru clan, falls upon this great forest. And the second stanza of the poem is called The Killing. So each animal, each tree is threatened by the human greed, as it happens also in today's world. and the ashes remain. Suddenly there is a vision that a seed is sprouting, an optimism about life, death, and then regeneration, the whole cycle of human existence. So, in her own words, rains coaxed out the sprouting out, leaf by leaf, for a little outing in the sun. But our joy, our hope is shattered in the last part. It's called the epitaph, in which she says it was just a vision, just a dream. The forest, or where the forest was, remains a barren land today. This kind of sums up the 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 turning point, or the journey with we have been undertaking in the name of forest, in the name of progress, for the last, ever since the Industrial Revolution in the 17th century. So it's a there's a bit of pessimism, but well-deserved pessimism, because there seems to be no way out. It's still the juggernaut of progress is bringing down forests and its dwellers. Similarly, I mean, she takes inspiration from the Purana, the mythology, and gives it a contemporary touch. Another very touching poem for me was Renuga. It's about the matricide. Renuga, as we know, is the mother of the person who founded Kerala, Parashuram, who was asked to be killed by her husband, Parashurama's father, because he suspected her chastity. Now, this is an outright attack on patriarchy. That's another human failure we see, that gender equality was never a strong suit for us. It still remains the same. And by interweaving the story of the mother-son relationship and the husband-wife relationship, she brings back again the whole patriarchal conundrum which human lives are undergoing through. Similarly, from very recent times, she has taken the story of Saik Ansari, a football wannabe who was a stowaway and died in the process of migrating. So these are just windows to our times through the prism of the past, and receive wisdom of our mythologies. So in my preface to the book, I didn't say it's a good book or it's a wonderful book. I said it's an important book. It's an important book because there is a tradition of Indian English poetry. This Indian English poetry, which had great writers like Demoness, Nissim Ezekiel, and recently deceased Jayant Mahapatra. In this tradition, probably have is not been growing much. So I think Chandana's debut is a great fillip to what was once a flourishing branch of literature in India. So once again, congratulations, and thank you all, the host, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before we release the book, a few words about the author. Chandana Ramachandran's poetry is a reflection of her unique and blessed upbringing. Raised by parents who instilled in her a deep sense of compassion and respect for the world around her, Chandana's formative years were enriched by the tales of the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Puranas, vividly brought to life by her grandmother. From a young age, Chandana was encouraged to explore, question, and think independently. Surrounded by writers, poets, and storytellers, she was immersed in the beauty of the written word and the enchantment of poetry. Gifted with a profound insight into human nature and remarkable observational skills, Chandana has crafted poems that resonate deeply with the readers. By day, Chandana is a dedicated bureaucrat. Only a word can slay death marks her debut collection. Next, we have a message from Sri K. Sachidanandan. Sri K. Sachidanandan, President of Kerala Sahitya Academy, a pioneering force in modern Indian poetry, was former editor of the journal Indian Literature and the former secretary of Sahitya Academy. He has authored more than 60 books of poetry and criticism. He has several awards and recognitions to his credit, which include four Kerala Sahitya Academy Awards for poetry, drama, travel, writing, and criticism, three national awards, the Friendship Medal from the Government of Poland, a knighthood of the Order of Merit from the Government of Italy, and a Dante Medal from Italy. His books have been translated into many Indian and foreign languages. Due to unexpected reasons, he is unable to join us online today. He has sent a message about his thoughts on the book, which will be read by Sri Ramachandran Rajashekaran, brother of Chandana, who is also a published poet.
I read this message from Mr. Sachidanandan. Within quote, Dear Chandana, I'm sorry about the program today. I have a sudden, unexpected, urgent meeting in the evening in Delhi, where I am now. The message starts, Chandana Ramachandran's debut collection, Only a Word Can Slay Death, presents a set of poems that sets out so-called mainstream by their freshness, sadness, and candour. Nature, language, and death seem to form a rare triangle. Here, when Chandana speaks about the death of forest and of words in a tone of bitter detachment. The great forest is like a requiem for our dying forest, rich in painful details, while the birdsong follows like a soothing rain falling over the ashes as the poet watches words getting crushed under the wheels of unkind times. Putana looks like a demoness with curious kindness, while remembrance is looking upon a relentless swimmer carrying blue opals from sunken islands. What remains after reading these poems is a silent melancholy that sets the tone of most of them. Please request Madhavan to release the book on my behalf. This is a message, unquote. This is a message from Sachidanandan. He had been called to Delhi for a sudden, unexpected meeting. So back to hostess, please.
Thank you, sir. I now request Sri N.S. Madhavan to formally release the book.
Oh, I see it inverted. I hope it is direct to the audience. It's with great pleasure, really, truly great pleasure that I'm doing the honors on behalf of Sachi. And once again, congratulations to Chandana.
Thank you, sir. We will hear from Professor A.M. Varghese, former head of the English department at Union Christian College, Alua, and former faculty member at Kaladi University. He has introduced several generations of students, including the poet, to the magic of modern poetry through his delightful classes.
Good evening. I feel greatly honored to being called to speak. But I am overwhelmed and somewhat awed by the presence of N.S. Madhavan. His presence takes me back more than 40 years. My ways have crossed rather innocuously with his in ways that he would never have known, but which remains important to me. It was in the early 80s that N.S. Madhavan published his first volume of short fiction, Chulaimedile Shavangal. It was first published by a small publishing house called Nila Publishers. The distribution of books was very different in those days. It was even a political act. I remember a dozen copies of the volume coming to me for distribution or sale, as one may call it. I gave away 10 of the copies and kept 2 for myself, which still remain with me. I kept 2 copies with me because those were times when books would be borrowed and often would not come back. It seemed wise to have an extra copy in reserve. I also have 2 copies of London Batterile Luthiniyagal, the handsome hardbound volume and the paperback. I used to lend only the latter. I recall the opportunity I had to attend the release of Sri Ramachandran Rajashekharan's volume, Smiling in My Sleep. One by one, I have read all the poems in the volume. And now to Chandana. 4 decades back, between 1982 and 1987, Chandana was in UC College. She did her BA and MA, and I was fortunate to be among her teachers. For 1 year during this period, I was away at the University of Calicut. The 80s were a time when students were generally very kind to teachers. They have been so even later. Many who studied during those years still keep in touch. I remember Chandana as a contemplative person, seeming to be in conversation with herself. Poetry was indeed there. I remember reading her poems in the college magazine. I remember her writing the civil services examination, her success, and I also remember her coming to the department, dropping in after her training was over. She looked, I guess the training was in Missouri. She looked transformed then when she came back. Several years later, in 2020, November 2020, I got a call from Chandana. and a poem titled Thrift. It is not included in the present volume, but it was a poem which fascinated me, a very small poem. Many more poems followed. Since then, we have been in happy conversation. She has been sending me poems on WhatsApp and mail, and I have been reading them. I have read every poem sent thus, sometimes once, sometimes more. I occasionally go back to them. In the process, I have gained a new familiarity with poetry and gained a new understanding of poetic language. As a teacher, one is constrained by the pedagogic need to explain and analyze poems and subject them to all kinds of surgery. Such obligations vanish with retirement. And I could now engage with poetry in a more liberated and wholesome manner. I have read all the poems in the present volume, and I have been fascinated by their strength, turn of the phrase, sudden revelations, and soft unfolding of insights. There is seething anger sometimes, there is whimsy, and there is fun. The volume carries many pieces which move away from myths, woven away from myths. As N.S. Madhavan says in the preface, there is a convergence of the contemporary moment and myth in Chandana's poems. She invests them with new relevance, sometimes sharp significance as well. This is important in our moment in time when myths are deployed as a toolkit of biopolitical control. There is sunshine in many poems. In many poems relating to everyday life, there are special moments, incidents, sights. The short poems, the haikus, come to life with unexpected words, flippant turns, and sheer fun. The poetry website, allpoetry.com, has been carrying Chandana's poems for quite some time. These have come in for special praise, comments, and have been picked for front page display. But the book format continues to have a unique fascination. From the time I started reading Chandana, I have looked forward to seeing the poems in a printed volume, then to be followed by many other volumes of poems. One of my teachers, and later a senior colleague, Professor Valsalakumari, and Dr. Verghese John, whom I see among the participants, often used to mention the same sentiments. So there is a way in which Chandana's poems call up other poems and other poets. Some of the pieces, by their sheer tone and mood, have taken me to Emily Dickinson. I realize that others have also made the same comparison. For me, the similarity is in the unexpected, sudden poetic turn. Chandana's poems have been creatively collated into a chapbook. Two of her friends from Canada, Kirk and Lean, who I presume are here, collaborated in the project. This was my first exposure to this rare convergence of text, images, and voice. The Italian thinker Giorgio Agamben describes terminology as the poetic moment of thought. Every new term, it describes something in ways that have not been described before. So a new term is in itself a poem. A moment when thought gets defined and named is a poetic moment. Poetry finds words for incidents, problems, sights, emotions, and a host of other things. This is because words are never enough. We do not have enough words. There are no words for eternity. There are no words for infinity. Both must be dealt with through their opposites, time and limited space. I am fond of the lines of William Blake, which I usually quote when I used to quote when introducing poetry. To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. One can reach eternity only through an hour, and eternity and through the infinity through the palm of your hand, because there are no words for eternity. There are no words for infinity. You have to reach them through their opposites. So every poem is an adventure. Each poem of Chandana in the volume constitutes a combination of words that have not been used before in the same way. Each is a special metaphor crafted out of words. The poems are unique. The title of the volume is special and unique. Only a word can slay death. Rather than speaking about individual poems, let me read in my own way a couple of poems that I like for their fun, but then I like the other poems too for other reasons, or without any need for reasons. I read these not because I read well, but because the poems are infinitely more important than anything that I can say about them. I'll read two poems. One is Doodle, a small poem. It happened on an otherwise ordinary day. I saw two yellow butterflies fluttering around big red flowers and sunlight curling around them like a golden marker pen. I didn't know it was God doodling. Then one more poem. It is an incident. Squirrels come often in Chandana's poems. There's a squirrel here as well. And in one poem, she uses a squirrel as a verb, squirreling. An incident. A squirrel and 7 babblers had an altercation below my window. I didn't know what it was about. All involved spoke so fast. The little squirrel was outnumbered, but stood its ground most vocally. Babblers, as usual, spoke silly and loud, and the battle was divided even, till a dog walked in. The full majesty of law. Squabblers dispersed. Order restored. It then gave me a look as if I had failed in my post, maintaining peace. So, Chandana, congratulations. Thanks for having me at this moment, and greetings and love to everyone present. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We will hear from T. Kirk Tierney, a Canadian poet, editor, and critic of poetry. A commanding presence on the international website of poetry, allpoetry.com, and the head of the group CC, Constructive Criticism. TKT is also a mentor of poets, teaching them, guiding them, and handholding them.
Hello. Seems you can hear me. I can hear you in the background. Hold on one sec. There we go. I've got some feedback here. We'll try again. And some feedback in the background. Well, hello, Chandana. It's been a while since you've seen my face. Chandana and Lynn and I have sat together pleasantly for many, many hours in many hundreds of days, reading her poetry in considerable detail. Lynn and I working as editors and never needing to change the idea or line of thrust in one of her poems. It was a great honor. I decided today that I would read you one of my poems, which was entirely line by line derived from one of Chandana's poems. And what you will see is the result is bloody good because it was going to be bloody good no matter what. I am amazed, Chandana, at you and your little notebook and the endless variety of perceptions that you have to present to us. What a wealth for you, but a wealth for any poet. You know, makes me jealous, but I only have to edit a little bit here and there. Dot an I, cross a T. This poem that I wanted to read to you is called The Astonishing Simplicity of Happiness, and every thought in it came directly from Chandana. We talked for a long time about how this arrived and where she was and what was happening. She talks about her grandmother's house. I took a virtual tour of her grandmother's house, almost room by room, and how the kitchens were laid out and stuff like that. And it was a privilege. So I decided that the best thing I could do to express my joy at working with Chandana on things, because she brought so many ideas, so many hundreds of them, was to write a poem drawn line by line from one of hers and see whether or not it turned out any good written in my voice. Well, it turned out pretty good. And my point is, if you have ideas and perceptions in the unending parade that she presented to Lynn and I for hundreds and hundreds of poems, of which there are so many more, well, it's going to be good. So I'm going to read The Astonishing Simplicity of Happiness, an homage. It's only 15 lines. I sit pensive in my flat tonight, breathing the exhalations of a city. My ears and eyes fill with roar, with light. I dream pensive of an old twilight where golds turned into purples and then to inky black. I sway with the bushes and trees as sleepy birds alight, as silence fades, as the buzz of cicadas rise and fall like time breathing in and out. I float where the air has a wood smoke bite, and beneath we have the musk of earth, and above we have the sweetness of frangipani. I smile pensive in my flat tonight, remembering quiet evenings at Grandma's house. evenings filled with the astonishing simplicity of happiness. And Chandana, Lynn and I bow to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Recording in progress.
Now we will have Lynn Monica Clare, Canadian poet, writer, and editor, reading some poems from this book. A major poet on the international website of poetry, allpoetry.com, Lynn has published several photography and poetry books. Lynn's reading of soulful and mellifluous poetry is sheer magic, as is reading some of the poet's poems. Just as Mr. Kirk, Lynn has also been kind enough to join us even though the timing was challenging. We will hear her recitals, now beginning with the poem Perhaps.
Perhaps, a poem by Chandana Ramachandran, read by Lynn Gauthier. Perhaps. The sky was inky blue-black, thicker in some places, thinner somewhere, like a child's coloring. Then I thought I saw the twinkle of a tiny star in the far-away place, beyond the inky black sky. Did I? The twinkle of a star in the inky blue-black sky. Perhaps.
Second recital will be of the poem Spangled in Stardust.
Spangled in Stardust, a poem by Chandana Ramachandran, read by Lynn Gauthier. Spangled in Stardust. A song came and hid in my flute and tickled my restless fingers. I set her free to roam the sky. She soared up in the onyx night and fluttered around the twinkling stars. The moon had risen, a gleaming crescent, bobbing in the silver clouds. A night wind hushed the rustling leaves, straining to catch the tune. My flute, now empty and silent, stayed in my hand, a dead weight. I stood alone in the deep dark night, weary and earthbound, watching a song fly away, wings spangled in stardust.
Third recital will be of the poem I See You Waiting Room.
I See You Waiting Room, a poem by Chandana Ramachandran, read by Lynn Gauthier. I see you waiting room. We are careful not to meet the eyes of another for the weight of our own anxieties. Our own grief is unbearable enough. To deal with another's would be beyond endurance. But the air we breathe is soaked in sadness about life, so lamentably small in scope, so puffed up in desires of those who had come, waited, and gone, of those who will come, wait, and go, and of us. I see you waiting room.
Thank you, ma'am. Wrapping up the evening's program, let us now hear from the author, Chandana Ramachandran, which will then be followed by an interactive session. Given the limited time available, please have your questions ready. If you would like to engage with the poet, kindly send us a message via the chat box, or you may raise your hand and we will unmute you. Over to you, ma'am.
I feel extremely overwhelmed I can hardly speak to listen to, listening to and meeting all the speakers, Shienas Madhavan, Unichetan, AMG, and TKT, Lynn, all of you have spoken here. I feel so overwhelmed by my respect, my love, and my gratitude towards you all. And all those who are present here, my teachers, my friends, my colleagues, I don't know how to thank you. Each and every one of you have supported me in my endeavors with poetry writing. I'm overwhelmed. I'm repeating myself. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, I think we have a few questions in the chat box. First one is from Miss Beena. What prompts you to write poetry?
I'm sorry I can't answer that question. I write when I feel like writing.
Ma'am, next question is from Rita. Who has influenced you most as a poet?
I was brought up in a household where reading and listening to poetry was a usual practice. And for some time, I thought every household must have been like that. So that was there. So it was natural. There are so many poets whom I admire. There are so many beautiful things around the world and so many heartbreaking things in the world. So all of it sometimes make me write.
I think that has answered your question. Next one is from Mrs. Geeta. What are the major themes of your poems?
I think I don't know. I cannot separate themes. Whatever I feel like writing, I once again repeat, whatever I feel like writing, I write. I never sit down and say, think that I will write about this today. Whenever I feel like writing, on whatever I feel like writing on, I write. That's all. I think in the chat box, Dr. Molly Joseph wants to speak.
Yes.
Perhaps you can allow her.
Okay. Vivek, can you please unmute her? Dr. Molly.
Thank you, dear Priyanka, and of course, Chandana. Chandana, it's my real pleasure to be here, though I was not sure whether I could make it. What a joyous occasion it is, and august presence of our literary veteran, N.S. Madhavan. How well it was launched, and I could hear my friend Givargi speaking. And so many friends of mine have gathered, like Riddhi Meno and so many other people. I hope my close friend, your aunt Vijayalakshmi also is here. And Mr. Rajashekharan, we are all in one group and we know each other so well. 2-3 things, being a poet myself, was done some research work in postmodern poetry. 2-3 things just I want to highlight on Chandana's poetics. Because Chandana used to send me certain poems for evaluation and reviews. One thing is, she is a poet very much of the present. She's not a poet who is, confining herself to her imaginative ivory castle and then writing, philosophizing, dreaming, and all that. I find the spark of a genuine contemporary poet in her. In the sense, even when he rereads epics or looks at nature, there is ingrained in that, embedded in that metaphor, the right approach she suggests to the world. It's not anything negative. But of course, she points out what is wrong. What happened in Manipur, she had her way. She had her say on it. What happens to the forest? How depletion happens. Let me read out to you one poem that she once sent to me, Patricide. I was very impressed by that poem. Just listen, I hope I'm not stealing much time. But just to highlight to the audience the speciality that appealed to me of Chandana's the poet and her poetics. Patricide. It took 2 days to kill the old tamarind tree. First, they cut off the little twigs. They were in full bloom, little fruits shaping up. Then the large branches were sawed off, and finally the big trunk. The tree knew it could not light, run, or scream. It patiently waited for the slow, efficient death, remembering one last time. Yes, the feet climbing on its lap and shoulders, the hands plucking its fruits, ripe and tender, the hearts leaping in joy on swings, flying high, the worn out limbs stretching in its shade. When all was over, tiny sprigs lay scattered on the ground, laden with flowers and fruits, looking at stars, listening to the lullaby of earth, like children spared from the betrayal of growing up. I remember writing a review on this poem of hers. I think you get the very feel of what Chandana the poet is and her poetics. She engages herself with the world, and that too in a bold way, though sometimes straitjacket in her bureaucratic apron. Sometimes she has to express, and sometimes I have to contain her because I feel so much of resonance can create some disturbance. Okay? So that's it, Chandana. All the best to you, my dear. I remember when I saw the caption, only a word can slay death. I thought of the great quote of Margaret Atwood. Words and words and words, they make meaning. Ultimately, we all turn to be stories. So through words, we are imprinting our presence on earth. Dear Chandana, you have lot more to go. I wish you would soar up like a falcon soaring up and then telling the world what is the sustainable thing that is needed for the present. All the best to the poet of the present, Chandana. Thank you for sparing time for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those wonderful words. Miss Lynn couldn't come on screen earlier due to her line dropping off. We would love to hear from her now. Ma'am, can you please unmute yourself?
Please unmute, ma'am.
Sorry, ma'am, but we can't hear you.
Sorry, still not audible, ma'am. Can you try unmuting once again? No, ma'am, you're still not audible. Priyanka, maybe we can try going to the next question and give us some more time.
Ma'am, we have a question from Mr. Mohan. How can poetry impact contemporary society when poetry readership is very small?
I think poetry readership has always been very small. And I don't know how it impacts society, but I think of all the way of writing, poetry has its own unique impact. And we may not remember the fiction or the essays we have read, the newspaper reports we have read, but all of us can recall at least 4 lines of poetry, which we might have heard maybe decades earlier. So I think poetry has its own wings. It can take it anywhere.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's move on to the next question. Yeah, we have a question from Mr. Ragesh. How does Indian poetry in English fare compared to poetry written in Indian languages?
I always see poetry as poetry, provided I can read it, provided that I can understand the language. So I think all poetry are equal. The language doesn't make any difference.
Next question is from Mr. Xavier. Do you plan to write in Malayalam?
First of all, I never plan to write poetry. Planning is which is something which I associate with other things. I do write in Malayalam occasionally.
Thank you, ma'am. Vivek, are we able to connect with Lynn? Yes.
I don't think so. But I think I can read her message, which has come on the chat box. Congrats on the release of your debut collection, Only a Word Can Slay Death, Chandana. It's easy for readers to connect with your poetry. Your style is all about the human experience and demonstrates at every turn that you have a warm heart and kind soul. This is what she did in the chat box. Priyanka, I think we are at the end of our scheduled time. We can probably close now.
Okay.
Chandana ma'am, can we close now?
Ma'am, you're
Ma'am, you're on mute, sorry.
Once again, I want to thank each and every person who has been present here and spared this 1 hour for me. I feel that I don't deserve this, but I bow before your generosity. Thank you so much for your affection and your concern for me. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, ma'am. With this function is coming to an end. We request that all of you read the book, which is now available on Amazon, internationally, and on all e-platforms in India, including Amazon. I, Priya, thank all the guests who joined us today. I'm now signing off, wishing you all a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you. It was such a beautiful program. happy I could take part. All best wishes.
Thank you all.
Madam, shall I end the meeting? If anyone wants to interact informally, they may please do so, or we can end the meeting now. I think we can close. Madam, can we close the meeting now?
Chandana ma'am, shall we close the meeting?
Thank you once again. All of you. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yeah, I think a few people are using the chat box, so I think we'll just leave it on for 5 more minutes and then close the meeting. Thank you, Priyanka.